So today I hope to take you on a quick tour of Ayurveda. It's an ancient system of healing that's over 5,000 years old. So I'm probably going to give it about 50 minutes. So the ratio of 5,000 to 50 is pretty intense, but we're going to try and cover a lot of ground in that area, in that time. And what I'm hoping to do today is really give a little bit of a theoretical overview of the discipline, and then talk a little bit about how we might each be able to apply some of those principles to ourselves in terms of creating an optimal lifestyle that encourages our best performance in all realms of life. And Ayurveda really is dedicated to bringing out the fullest potential at the body, mind, and spirit level. So I'm just going to start out by defining the word Ayurveda. Ayurveda comes from two Sanskrit roots, Ayur meaning having to do with life or living, and Veda meaning wisdom or knowledge. So systematized wisdom or knowledge is sometimes called science. So sometimes it's translated as science of living, sometimes as wisdom of living, sometimes knowledge of right living. But all of those definitions really speak to the idea of Ayurveda as a system for not just treating illness or disease, but for actually creating optimal health in each of the individuals that uses that discipline. Now, in the Ayurvedic worldview, every single thing in the cosmos, including we human beings, are actually composed of 5 great elements. And this is bhuta. 5 great bhutas are elements. That's a Sanskrit word for it. And these 5 great elements are space, air, fire, water, and earth. Now, when we talk about elements in this context, we're not talking about the physical substance of fire or the physical substance of air. We're actually talking more about the qualities that are embodied in these substances. So, for example, fire would be the quality of heat or illumination. Water would be the quality of fluidity. Earth would be the quality of stability or solidity. So in the Ayurvedic worldview, these 5 great elements in all different permutations and combinations account for the entire universe as we know it. Now, these 5 great elements, when they come together to form sentient life, they are transmutated into a little bit more of a subtle form, which are called doshas. So doshas are bioenergetic forces, which are actually the result of the pairing of the great elements. So space and air come together to form Vata dosha. Fire and water come together to form Pitta dosha. And water and earth come together to form Kapha dosha. So I just wanted to say that this diagram is something that we're going to have to come back to multiple times and refer back to this, because even though it's a fairly simple diagram, it actually contains a lot of profound information in terms of why Ayurveda recommends what it does in terms of treatments or in terms of its assessments. And so it's really important to understand that these qualities of space, air, fire, water, and earth, and understanding these qualities is really instrumental to understanding the whole Ayurvedic worldview. So, when we talk about the qualities of space and air, in Ayurveda, space and air have qualities of lightness, of coldness, of dryness, of mobility. So when these come together to form Vata dosha, in all sentient life forms, in all living beings, whether they're animals or humans, these 3 great doshas are responsible for everything that we consider to be life: respiration, digestion, breathing, thinking, feeling, reacting, movement, all of these. But each of these doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, sort of govern or rule certain aspects of sentient life. So space and air, these qualities of space and air come together and form Vata dosha. And Vata dosha is responsible for all movement in human beings or in all sentient life. So when we talk about movement here, we're talking not only about voluntary movement, but also involuntary movement. And I'm just going to talk about that a little bit in my next slide. But just sort of hold this idea that Vata is a force of movement. The other next dosha I want to talk about is Pitta dosha. Pitta dosha is almost all fire with just a little bit of water also combined in it. The Pitta dosha, because it's mostly fire, it has to do with the qualities of fire. When we think about fire, we think of something that's sharp, penetrating, hot, illuminating. And Pitta, in fact, has a lot of these qualities in terms of its functions within the sentient life forms. So Pitta dosha we consider the sort of fire of transformation in the human body and in all sentient life. So whether that transformation is a very physiological, concrete transformation, like the digestive process is considered a form of transformation, or whether it's at a more mental level, Pitta dosha is the dosha of transformation, the energy of transformation in the body. The third dosha is Kapha dosha, and Kapha is formed by water and earth, the great elements of water and earth coming together. Think about what water and earth, when they combine, form. Sort of like mud, right? Really thick, heavy, static. And these are some of the qualities of Kapha dosha. Kapha dosha is responsible for all of the binding energy in the body and in the mind and in all sentient life. Binding, lubricating, protecting, these are all qualities of Kapha dosha. So this is the quick overview of these three doshas, and I'm going to talk in the next slide about a little bit more detail about each of these doshas. So the very important concept to understand about doshas is that every dosha, each of the three doshas, has a very specific expression at every dimension of the human being. So Vata dosha manifests as movement at the body level, at the mind level, and at more subtle energetic levels that you might want to call spiritual or consciousness or metaphysical, whatever you want to call that realm. It also is manifested at that level. And then same thing with Pitta. Pitta has manifestations at the somatic level, at the psychological level, and then at more subtle levels that you might want to call spiritual. Kapha has, again, manifestation of body, mind, and spirit level. And this is very important because in the Ayurvedic worldview, it's not that Vata controls the body, Pitta controls the mind, and Kapha controls the spirit. It's not like that. It's each of these doshas is actually present at every single dimension of the human being. And that, in fact, even down to the cellular level. So even at the cellular level, Vata has manifestation, Pitta has manifestation, and Kapha has manifestation. So I want to say a little bit more about how these might manifest at each of these levels, just to give you a little bit of a sense of something that might be very abstract as I'm speaking. So Vata is the energy of movement. So at the body level, at the somatic level, that would translate into all voluntary movements, all involuntary movements like breathing. Well, breathing is sort of part voluntary, part involuntary, but let's say the beating of the heart, peristalsis of the GI tract, involuntary blinking of the eye, all of that would be considered a manifestation of Vata at the somatic level. At the psychological level, Vata is also the force of movement of the mind. In fact, we always say that what is the fastest entity of all? We say it's the mind in Ayurveda, because the mind can take you anywhere from here to the outer realm of the galaxy, just like that. You think about it and you're there. And so the mind is supposed to be the swiftest, the quickest moving entity of all. So that the movement of the mind, the natural tendency of the mind to jump from thought to thought, from feeling to feeling, from focus of attention from here to there, that tendency of the mind to move is considered to be part of Vata. And then at the most subtle level, Vata is considered to manifest as prana. Prana is, at the most subtle level, the life force. This is in Ayurveda the principle of just what do we consider the vital force that determines whether someone is dead or alive, and that's prana. So we say that Vata at the most subtle level is manifest as prana. Now, Pitta dosha, at the somatic level, Pitta is the energy of transformation, heat, assimilation, digestion. These are all aspects of Pitta. So at the somatic level, Pitta would be manifest, for example, as our body's capacity to generate heat. So maintaining a constant body temperature of 98.6 degrees. That would be an example of Pitta, the physiological functioning of Pitta, thermogenesis. And then also the digestive enzymes, the ability to heat up, chemically the food that we take in and then break it down and digest it. That's considered also a manifestation of Pitta. And then at a more subtle psychological level, the force of Pitta manifests as the capacity of the mind to digest the perceptions and information that are taken in from the outside world, and then you sort of digest and assimilate them into something that is a useful action or a useful game plan or an understanding of something. So that ability to take in information, but then really sort of digest it, assimilate it into one's being is a manifestation of Pitta. And this is very important. In fact, when we say, someone is very, very smart, we might say, oh, they're really bright, or they're really sharp. And these are actually qualities of Pitta, qualities of fire, which Pitta is mostly considered to be made up of. And then at the most subtle level, Pitta is manifest in the Ayurvedic view as Tejas. Tejas is brilliance. It's translated as brilliance. So prana is life force. It's whether we are alive or dead, whether we have this movement of energetic force going through us. But how vital, how bright is that life force? How brilliant is it? Is it very, very weak, or is it really strong and robust? So Tejas is that sense of brilliance to the life force that permeates the being. And so at the most subtle level, Pitta is manifest as Tejas. Then Kapha dosha at the somatic level. We talked about Kapha being the force of binding, the force of lubrication. So at the somatic level, the ability of the body to actually create more body mass, to create more cellular mass, for example, that would be a manifestation of Kapha. So a growing child, who weighs 30 pounds last year and now weighs 40 pounds this year, he gained an extra 10 pounds. And that 10 pounds, we say, is a manifestation of Kapha working. So in children, Kapha dosha is actually a very, very strong force in children. But unfortunately, even as we age, Kapha can sometimes be a very interesting and important force too, as we gain weight and as we perhaps slow down a little bit and become a little more static and a little more sort of deliberate in the way we operate. These are all manifestations of Kapha dosha. Again, at the somatic level, not only the amassing of body tissue, but also the lubrication of the joints, the lubrication of the alveoli, the forming of mucus throughout the body. This is all considered also a manifestation of Kapha at the somatic level. Because remember, Kapha is water mostly and earth. So think about those qualities of water and earth when you think about Kapha. So water and earth binds, but water and earth also lubricates and moistens. And so that's one of the primary functions of Kapha. At the mental level, the psychological level, Kapha, the binding force of Kapha, is manifest in one way as memory. So our ability to hold on to information, to bind the information that we hear and be able to really recall it when we need it, that's an expression of Kapha at the mental level. And then also Kapha at an interpersonal level, the ability to form interpersonal bonds, to bind ourselves to another person, that ability to be caring, empathic, loving, that's also considered to be a manifestation of Kapha. So at the psychological level, Kapha manifests as these tendencies as well. And then at the most subtle level, Ojas is the manifestation of Kapha at that sort of metaphysical or spiritual level. And Ojas roughly translates into resilience or stamina, if you want to call it that. So it's the ability to sort of, fight off and protect oneself in the face of whatever adversities might beset us. So that ability to just sort of have a certain kind of resilience and stamina in the face of stress, that's a manifestation of Kapha at the most subtle level. So prana, tejas, and ojas are at the most subtle level of manifestation of vata, pitta, and kapha. But for the most of this talk, we're going to be focusing more on body and mind. Although we can certainly also talk a little bit about the manifestations of these forces at the metaphysical level. But a lot of the rest of this talk really has to do with how vata, pitta, and kapha sort of manifest at the body-mind level, and how we might be able to use this information in terms of guiding our own lifestyle choices. So in Ayurveda, every single human being has vata, pitta, and kapha within themselves. But every single person has a very unique proportion of vata, pitta, and kapha. So it's sort of like a bioenergetic fingerprint. No two people will have exactly the same proportions of vata, pitta, and kapha. All three are necessary for life, but every single person has a different proportion of these. And this is very, very important to understand in Ayurveda what this proportion is. This proportion is called your constitution. And you're born with this constitution, essentially. And in the Ayurvedic worldview, health or optimal living comes out of making lifestyle choices that keep you in balance with your basic constitution. of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Because unfortunately, these three doshas can be thrown off balance based on various lifestyle choices. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But based on how you live your life, you can either keep Vata, Pitta, and Kapha in the proportions that you were born with, and that's considered to be your point of strength, your sort of source of power and maximal resilience in the face of stress. And then when you are off balance in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, then you're much more vulnerable to dealing with whatever stresses come at you. You're much more vulnerable to developing some kind of distress or some kind of symptoms as a result of that. And in Ayurveda, this is sort of the explanation for why the same stressor might affect 10 different people in 10 different ways, depending on how much in balance they are or not in terms of their constitution. So if someone comes in coughing and sneezing into a room with 10 people, some people might walk away from that encounter with absolutely no ill effects whatsoever, and they just keep going on their merry way. And maybe other people will feel a little bit under the weather for a day or two, but then kind of recuperate very quickly and move on. And maybe somebody else will just come down with the flu for 2 weeks and be completely out flat for that period of time. So Ayurveda would say, well, that's because this differential response is because each of those individuals who encountered the exact same stressor in the form of this virus or whatever it was that was being spewed into the environment, that these people had different internal capacity to sort of meet that stress and to overcome it based on how much in harmony they were with their basic constitution. So the goal in Ayurveda is to understand what your constitution is and then to make wise lifestyle choices that keep you in balance with that constitution so that you have maximal resilience in the face of stress. And that stress can come in any form. It can come in the form of a viral or bacterial illness, or it can come in the form of emotional stress, or it can come in the form of financial stress or interpersonal stress, whatever it is. But you will have maximum resilience to meet that stress if you're living in balance with your constitution. So how does one determine constitution in the Ayurvedic worldview? So Ayurveda says that, first of all, because going back to that definition of health, health is when you are in optimal balance in terms of your constitution. So what Ayurveda says is, well, let's think back to when you were at your optimal functioning, in your life, at every level, body, mind, and spirit level. Let's think about a time when you were at your best functioning. And we will take that to be the point at which you were most in balance in terms of your doshas. And so let's think back to that point in time. And when I actually do these assessments with my patients, I'll actually try to get them to even think of like a specific month of a specific year. So in May 1985, when this person was 25 years old, they really felt that they were at their optimal functioning. So then I'll ask them a series of questions, saying, when you were 25 years old in May 1985, I want you to answer these questions for me. And depending on how that person answers the questions, I will have a sense of how much Vata was in their constitution, how much Pitta is in their constitution, how much Kapha is in their constitution at that point of optimal health. And so the questions that I'll ask will have to do with a variety of different mind-body parameters. So Ayurveda really has an exhaustive list of questions that are designed to get at different parameters, mind-body. Some of them are physical. So, for example, I will look at body build and weight and think about, where were they when they were 25? What was their body build? What was their body weight? And then I compare it to where they are now. So that will give me a sense of, here's where they were at their optimal functioning, and here's where they are now. And then that gives me an idea of which dosha or set of doshas is most changed or most affected. Now, if there's somebody that is in great health and is taking really great care of themselves, there won't be much difference between how they would answer these questions from when they were at their optimal point of health to how they would answer them now. But for a lot of people, there is a big difference in one dosha or another. And so depending on which dosha is most affected, that will determine the course of treatment in terms of helping them to bring back that particular dosha. But this form of assessment is very important and critical, not just for illness, but also if someone is curious, how do I maintain my health? How do I keep going? So far, thank goodness everything is going fine and I'm feeling pretty good, but how do I maintain that? And what can I do in terms of lifestyle that will keep me in balance so that I won't get thrown off balance? And so Ayurvedic assessments have a very, very important function in also maintaining wellness. So some of the parameters, as I mentioned, are physical in terms of body build and weight. I will look at their tongue, I will look at their skin, look at their hair and nails, because again, in each of these parameters, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha will manifest in a certain way. So for example, and I'll talk about this more in my next slide, but just to take one example, in terms of body build, a Vata person, think about Vata being a combination of space and air. A Vata person has a lot of lightness inherently built into their constitution. So Vata people will generally tend to be very lean and very light in terms of their overall body build and shape. They might be very, very tall and skinny or very small and petite, but in general they'll have a leanness and slimness to them, and they will be one of those people that will really have a difficult time putting on weight. You know, their problems in adolescence might have been that they had a hard time, you know, gaining weight with the rest of their classmates, and even now they tend to lose weight if they're under stress or if, you know, they're not taking care of themselves properly. So that has to do with the Vata quality of air and space being such an inherent part of that person. Now the Pitta person, their body build will actually be a lot more, what we would say, fiery. It would be a lot more sort of powerful and a lot more robust and a lot more having a tendency towards precision and sharpness and sort of the quality of heat. So that might manifest as a ruddy complexion or sharp features or a very, very forceful way of walking or speaking in terms of their overall body habitus. So this would be just one example. And then Kapha people would have a tendency to really be very, very sturdy and well built, maybe tending towards overweight very easily. So it wouldn't take much for a Kapha type person to put on body weight. But in general, these are very large individuals, not necessarily fat, but just very large and very big boned, very proportionately large in terms of both height and girth many times. So this is just one example. So then I might ask them, so as a child or as a, you know, at your point of optimal health, you know, what was your body build like and how is it now? And how much has it changed, if at all? And that gives me one indication of which parameter in terms of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha may have changed. And so I go through a whole list of questions like this, and Ayurveda gets very, very precise about a lot of parameters. I mean, what I've listed here are just some of them. You know, eating and elimination patterns. You know, so we might ask, well, how many bowel movements a day do you have? And sometimes people will look at me and say, what does that have to do with treating my depression? You know, but in the Ayurvedic worldview, it does, because Vata, Pitta, and Kapha govern peristalsis, they govern digestion, they govern all kinds of things. And so we need to understand who this person is in all of these different dimensions. And then sleep patterns and so on and so forth. So I'm going to just give you this slide for a minute, which tries to put together some of the information, some of the key information in terms of body-mind parameters and how they might manifest in a given individual. And again, remember, every single person has Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So no one is going to be missing one of the doshas. Every single person has all three. All three are critical for life. But we say that usually there's a predominance of one dosha or sometimes two doshas in that person. So when we speak here about constitutional types, what we're talking about is Vata predominance, Pitta predominance, or Kapha predominance. We're not talking about the person being all Vata or all Pitta or all Kapha. But we say that in general, you know, one or two of these doshas may predominate in the person's mind, body, spirit, being. And so how would that look if that person had a lot of Vata, a lot of Pitta, or a lot of Kapha in their constitutional makeup? So as I said, Vata is a combination of air and space. So that's going to translate in terms of physically, you know, into having a very lean, bony build. Many times these are individuals that will have a very rapid way of speaking or moving or going about doing things. Because again, think about air and space, you know, think about wind. Wind is very erratic. Sometimes it goes whoosh like this in gusts, and then other times it's just very, very still. So that quality of like erraticness and unpredictability is an aspect of Vata. And so that really determines like a lot of the Vata physiological traits, like being ravenous 1 minute and then being completely satiated.